Welcome, fellow wildlife warriors, to the Conservationists Assemble. I am your host, Captain Conservation, and I'm recruiting you to join me as we take the fight to our planet's biggest villain and my arch nemesis, extinction. Each week I will be teaming up with one of Earth's mightiest heroes to form the greatest collection of animal advocates ever known. We will be discussing the superpowers and abilities of our planet's epic species. Prepare for battle as we encounter extinction's armies that threaten our global biodiversity. Rally with the heroes featured on the Conservationists Assemble to discover and unite allies on the front lines of conservation. Tune in and listen to our heroes' origin stories and find inspiration on how to create one of your own for a better planet. This week's episode is all about the eastern black rhino, and I've teamed up with Dr. Mark Pilgrim from Werribee Open Range Zoo in Australia, who has the intel required to brief all you new recruits on what it is going to take to defeat extinction. Will you join the fight? Mark, it's an honour to be teaming up with you to fight against extinction today. How are you?
Hi, Johnny. Yeah, really good, thank you.
I'm glad to hear you're doing well, and I'm looking forward to getting into it and informing our recruits on the battleground that is the eastern black rhino conservation, including your origin story. So to start off then, Mark, could you please tell us about the eastern black rhino?
Sure. So, eastern black rhino are incredibly special. Firstly, they are famously critically endangered, and of the eastern black rhino, there's only about 1,000 left on the planet. So a really special, critically endangered animal close to the brink of extinction. They're really important in a whole number of ways, culturally, but also in terms of the habitat that they live in. As a large herbivore, a selective browser, they play an important role in the ecosystem of selectively browsing and opening up areas for other animals. So really important in terms of their conservation and really important to their ecology.
That's great, thank you. And could you just elaborate a bit more on the role they play in their wider ecosystem?
So they're ecosystem engineers. As a large herbivore, as they move through areas, selectively browsing, they're opening up pathways, they're creating wallows for themselves, other animals use, like frogs and birds. And so actually, like lots of large animals, they're really important because they actually change the whole habitat they live in and create more habitats for other animals. So really important in the ecosystem.
So you've mentioned that the eastern black rhino is critically endangered, but what is the population trend for the eastern black rhino?
There are other black rhino in South Africa and in Namibia also. So the eastern black rhino is the most endangered subspecies, and its population is growing. Actually, it's grown since the 1980s, when it got down to just under 400. So the late 1980s, we're down to 400, which is absolutely right on the very brink of extinction. And today there's around 1,000 in those countries. So 1,000 eastern black rhino and about 6,500 black rhino in general. So yeah, so on the increase, but still a tiny population.
It's great to hear that their numbers are increasing, but yeah, not out of the woods yet. So where are the threats to the eastern black rhino coming from?
So unlike most animals where the primary threat is habitat destruction and loss of habitat and places to live, that is some of the case for black rhino, but overwhelmingly the issue has been poaching for their horns. So actually, in terms of the conservation that's done for black rhino, there's no shortage of good habitat for black rhino. It's just they've been hunted out, poached out, hunted out for their horn. So that really is the number one issue. And we can see from population trends from free living rhinos that once you can get on top of poaching, and that's much easier to say than do, it's actually really difficult to do it. But if you can control the poaching, then population numbers start to pick up quite quickly.
So with that population increasing in the wild, what, if any, government aid is in place to ensure progress for the eastern black rhino?
So I've been fortunate to be involved in a couple of groups that involve the national governments of countries that have eastern black rhino. So the majority of eastern black rhino are in Kenya. There's a population also in Tanzania and in Rwanda. And all of these countries have a regional or national action plan for black rhino, and put a lot of funding and effort into anti-poaching and protection. So I think actually, there's there's a lot of government efforts going in to progress conservation of eastern black rhino across East Africa. It's constantly a challenge, and it's big money involved in the poaching of black rhino and rhinos in general. So actually mitigating against that threat is huge, but the governments are certainly committed.
So yeah, we've touched on the government involvement in eastern black rhino conservation. Now I'd like to talk about the zoo role in conservation. So firstly, could you tell us a bit more about the function and purpose of the eastern black rhino EEP, please?
Sure. So the EEP is basically an endangered species program within European zoos, and there's been black rhino in European zoos before the time of the major poaching crisis in the late 80s. So there's been a reasonable population in Europe. There's currently around 90 eastern black rhino in European zoos as part of a cooperative breeding program called the EEP. So if you think that 90 animals is almost a tenth of the global population, it's a really important population. It becomes more important because genetically, many of those animals in Europe actually were exported from Africa prior to that crash in populations in the 1980s, and therefore they contain genes that almost certainly no longer occur in free-living rhinos in Africa. So actually, it's a really important program within Europe. I have the privilege of coordinating it, and it relies on, like all cooperative programs, the cooperation of all the holders, where we basically have a very sophisticated stud book system, an animal management system, computer program that allows me to see which animals are related to which, look at the whole pedigrees, and work out the best pairings for the most genetic fit for all of the animals that we put together. So we're actually looking at genetic management based on their kinship, and we can do that and grow the population within European zoos. And so actually as a conservation tool, it's becoming really important because we're now producing rhinos, as I say, who contain genes that no longer occur in Africa. So actually, as genetically supplementing African populations is becoming really important.
Aside from the breeding program, what other ways are zoos contributing or collaborating with in situ programs?
Yeah, so a whole number of zoos across the world actually who hold rhinos are part of funding all sorts of organizations. And again, it's back to that. Most of the funding goes into anti-poaching patrols, making sure that poaching's all the things that needed to mitigate poaching, and that can be anything from the guys on the ground and having tents and boots and that sort of equipment, right through to having helicopters and very sophisticated guidance programs. So yeah, a whole number of zoos are supporting different national parks across East Africa to help support their anti-poaching patrols and their anti-poaching programs.
So we've talked about the three main benefactors in eastern black rhino conservation. As a collective or as a whole, then what actions need to happen to improve the chances of survival for this species?
So I think it's reached a stage now where there's two things. And again, the number one thing is to maintain and to decrease the amount of poaching, and that's the critical part of this, so that actually the populations get a chance to recover. Because once we get that level of breeding goes above the level of poaching, then we start to see the populations increase. But the second part of it now is that because the populations got so small, and it's not one big population, so although there's 1,000 black rhino, these are in separate little national parks around, and some very, very big national parks, but small populations in national parks across East Africa. And so the second thing that needs to happen is that genetic management of rhinos from one park to another, because those small populations are not sustainable. They will become genetically inbred. And so the selection of and moving animals from one national park to another is going to be crucial to keep the genetics of the wild population healthy in exactly the same way that we do within zoos.
And how can everyone get involved in the conservation of eastern black rhino, even if they aren't in government, in situ, or in zoos?
Yeah, I think that probably the best way to get involved, if you really are passionate about black rhino, is to support one of the specialist rhino charities. There's there's a couple. The International Rhino Foundation, for example, or Save the Rhino International are both really good charities who do an amazing work raising money to protect rhinos all around the world. So I think you would visit those websites and support them in financially support them in a small way if you can. And with those organizations, and also, of course, the zoos who are also doing rhino conservation work, you'll get some feedback onto where your money's going, how it's being spent, and what's happening with rhino populations around the world. So I would say, I mean, it is around fundraising, because again, anti-poaching patrol and conservation of rhinos in Africa is expensive. But if you really want to get involved, then raise some money and help support those organizations who are protecting rhino.
Have you got any fun facts or wow moments from your time around eastern black rhinos?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think wasn't something I heard, but something I learned for myself. I guess, working with eastern black rhinos in zoos early on in my career, the thing that surprised me most perhaps was what strong personalities they have, how individual each animal is, and how different they are. I don't know why I was so surprised by that, but it always surprised me. You've got those confident animals, you've got those very shy, inquisitive, and they're just all so different personalities. And I guess when I look at a rhino as a kid and looked at them, I never thought about them having these strong individual personalities. So that's the thing that amazes me. And also, I think is part of the tragedy when I see those horrific pictures of rhinos being poached, and that each of those animals wasn't just a number. It wasn't just it was actually a really strong personality, a character, as well as a beautiful animal.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Where you're coming from. So, do you remember what your first experience with an eastern black rhino was?
Yeah, I think sort of. I think my first experience as a kid was actually going to London Zoo on a day trip and seeing black rhino there. And I think my attraction to rhino has always been because I love dinosaurs. As a kid, like many kids, really like dinosaurs, and somehow there was something very Triceratops-like about a rhino stomping around the paddock. And so I can remember that first kind of like looking at these animals with that huge, great horn on their face, and how heavy it looked, and just looking at these animals and just being, yeah, I can remember feeling like, wow, that's something really incredible to see, and it's still alive, right? These are not extinct animals, thank goodness. They're still, and they're just incredible. So yeah, I think that's probably my first experience.
And then fast forward to actually working with them. Do you have any kind of fun, light-hearted stories from your time around eastern black rhinos?
I've been really lucky. I've had a chance to spend time with black rhino in zoos and in the wild, and maybe a story that wasn't funny at the time, but now perhaps is funnier afterwards. Is I was spent some time in Tanzania, in Mkomazi, with the anti-poaching patrol rangers, tracking black rhino on foot, and we'd been tracking most of the day, and we hadn't come across any black rhino, and at one point there's like me and the other rangers, and they said, oh, we think we can hear one ahead. There's the sound of a bit of snorting noise going on, so just be aware that if it's a certain male, he's likely to charge us, and we're on foot, of course, but it's okay, because what you need to do is, if you hear it coming, just look for the nearest tree and climb the nearest tree. And that seemed like perfectly good advice, of course. And then we walked on another hour or so, and then we heard a definite snort and a roar of a rhino in the bush. And of course, when I looked around, there are no trees, and there's like these little tiny skinny trees. They've got these huge great thorns on them, and so the advice seemed. And I remember all the rangers just thinking it was hilarious that there I was looking around desperately trying to find a tree to climb, that wasn't possible. So they just ran, and I just followed them, actually. So they thought that was really funny at the time, and I now think it was probably funny afterwards. But yeah, at the time it really wasn't funny, looking for a suitable tree to climb and hide in, as this thing came out of the bushes. But yeah, I survived.
So, Mark, you've given us a really lovely insight into the current situation with rhinos, both in zoos and in the wild. Thank you for that. We're now going to switch track and just dive deeper into your origin story. So, could you just give us an insight of your background and the journey to where you are in your career so far?
Yeah, so I I've always loved animals from very, very young. I think from a very young age, and always wanted to work with animals. But I grew up in a big city. Grew up in Portsmouth in England, big military city, where nobody really that I knew or family connections had animals or worked with animals, and so I never really knew what a career working with animals was like. And to cut a long story short, I went to university later in life. I didn't do it straight after school, and studied zoology and decided that I really wanted to work with animals and work in the zoo world. And then I was very fortunate. Once I got my degree, I actually applied to a number of zoos around the world, and I got accepted as a trainee bird keeper at Chester Zoo in 1988. And I loved it. I loved being there, and it was very different to the zoo world today. But that got me started, and I guess kind of like many people, I've been very lucky as I progressed to a stage where I perhaps wanted to move on. Then I was able to get a promotion and move up, and I was very privileged to be at Chester for 33 years and the CEO for the last 10 years of that, which was incredible, and I loved that time. And after that, I went to become a consultant for a year. I needed a new challenge in my life, and I enjoyed. Again, I worked in East Africa, which was fantastic, and I love East Africa very much. But I missed the whole vibe of being in zoos and the people side of it, and the all the banter and all of the usual stuff. And so when an opportunity came to apply to become the director at Werribee Zoo in Australia, it just seemed like exactly the perfect challenge that I wanted. So, and I've always had a huge admiration for the work that Zoos Victoria does in terms of conservation of local species. I don't think there's any zoo in the world that can compete with the amount of local conservation work that goes on here. It's just quite incredible. So yeah, I'm just absolutely delighted to be here, and hopefully playing a role in the great work that they do.
Yeah, so throughout your career, having started on birds and becoming EP coordinator for rhinos, working with the range of species that you are in Australia, has there been an individual kind of species or individual animal that you've gained an attachment to?
Species are probably two. I mean, black rhino are very special to me, for a whole number of reasons. My history with them, and I spent so much time working around them and the conservation of them. But also, a whole another story, and I won't go into it now, but I did my PhD on a beautiful little parrot that lives in Ecuador, and I spent a lot of time, a huge chunk of my life researching and studying that also critically endangered species. So yeah, black rhino and Ecuadorian Amazon parrot.
And would you say that there's a favourite part of your role?
I love my role, first of all. I love what I do. I'm very fortunate and feel a real privilege to do what I do. I guess there's a number of things that I get huge pleasure from. One is just being around animals, although I spend more time in the office than I'd like to, but being around animals still gives me enormous pleasure. But actually, as I get older, actually just seeing people who I've worked with developing and moving on their careers, and seeing people develop. So people who were, interns of mine many years ago, seeing them now being directors of organisations and doing great conservation work is something that makes you incredibly proud. So very fortunate to be able to look back and see people that I'd like to think I played a little bit of influence on, who are now doing wonderful things in the conservation world. That's always gives me great pleasure.
Is there one lesson that you'd say that animals have taught you?
Yeah, I think one of the things it's easy to say but really hard to do in life is that being present in the moment. And it's something that animals do naturally, and people are constantly thinking about what happened yesterday and what they're going to be doing later or tomorrow. So I think there's that whole thing around just being present in the moment, that the most important time is now, and just to appreciate what you're doing at that moment in time. So I try very hard to just, whatever I'm doing, just be appreciative of the present, rather than constantly planning or looking back at how things used to be. So I think that's what animals teach us, really, is they really live in the present, and we can get completely lost in the past and the future. So yeah, just trying to be in the present, be aware of what's going on in the present and actually just enjoy being in the present rather than looking forward to something else that's happening later.
So, Mark, who were the influences on you in your career?
Yeah, so many. Like lots of people. Lots of people influenced me. I mean, I've got to say, of course, my parents. So, my mum was a massive animal lover and kind of like always had dogs and kind of was just completely animal nuts. And my dad had been in the Royal Navy and just filled me with stories of travel to exotic places and wonderful things that he'd seen. So I guess that mixture of animals and travel and just, filled me with a real sense of wanting to see as much of the world as I possibly could. So they were enormous influence, and just in a whole other ways, of course, as parents always are. And in my career, I think there's a number of people who I could mention, but perhaps just two for this that really had a special influence. One is Dr. Roger Wilkinson, who was my first boss when I became a bird keeper at Chester Zoo many years ago, and he was the curator of birds. And for so many ways, he taught me so much about how to deal with people, about the zoo world and the keeping of animals and just the whole sort of philosophy around all of that and the meaning of all of that. But also he was incredibly good fun. He was probably not the most politically correct person I've ever worked with, but he was hugely fun. And I still have memories now of crying with laughter, having to pull my car off the road because I was laughing too hard. I had to stop my car when I was traveling with him and things like that. So kind of like, and I have to say that he's now retired quite long ago, but we are still really good friends and we're still in contact very regularly. So yeah, so Roger was a big influence on me, and also the my predecessor as CEO at Chester Zoo, Gordon McGregor-Reed. His leadership style was a big influence on me. He's a real academic thinker, and the way that he approached things in a calm and methodical and scientific way was always very impressive. And he also had a huge influence in making sure that I did my studies. So I did my PhD because of a huge encouragement, and I'm going to say encouragement, from Gordon. And I was quite reluctant at the time. I was busy, I had a young family, I was working hard. I really didn't want to do a part-time PhD, but Gordon really pushed me to do that. And I wasn't grateful at the time, but I'm now hugely grateful because otherwise I wouldn't have done it. So yeah, Gordon and Roger particularly.
And would you say that there's kind of been one particular great bit of advice that you've received from someone that influenced your career or a mentor in your journey?
I guess one of the things is all about just being yourself, and trusting and having confidence in yourself and just trusting your instincts, and in conservation and in leadership, and people see very clearly kind of when you're being real and when you're being false, and kind of when you're putting on an act. So I really think in life generally, kind of you just need to play to your strengths. You know what you're good at, what you're not good at, and just be honest and open and transparent, and don't be afraid to share when you don't know or you're feeling vulnerable, and kind of all of those things that kind of just trust you. I think trust yourself, actually. It's have the confidence to just have trust in yourself is really important, but it's not always easy. And there's always days when you're racked with self-doubt and that confidence isn't there. But I think overall you just need to be, again, it's about really believing in the purpose of what you're doing and just heading for that goal.
So conversely to kind of influences then, have there been any hurdles that you've had to face, and how did you overcome them?
Yeah, I guess that everybody has hurdles in their career, but overall I have been incredibly lucky. I've generally been supported by brilliant people, a really nice team wherever I've worked, and I think kind of like the hurdles I think we create ourselves, and it's always, and now I guess as I look back and I one of the things is that I worked hard, and probably I didn't get my work-life balance right in the way that when I look back now, and I probably didn't go to many parents' evenings or sports days as I should have done, and all of that sort of stuff. I look back now and think, I wish if I had my time again, I'd probably spent more time with the family and working. But hey, look, that's just kind of like how it is. So kind of but no, I've been very lucky, and not massive hurdles, I'd say. I've enjoyed my working life hugely.
So what are some of the proudest achievements from your career to date?
The truth is that, you know, when you're a curator or a director or CEO of an organization, your achievements actually are built as part of, you know, operating as part of a large number of people. So you don't have individual achievements particularly. So as an individual achievement, my PhD I'm very proud of, because I'm not an academic person. And so I had to really work hard and knuckle down and grind that out, and it really wasn't easy for me. It didn't come easy to me to do that. So that on a personal level. But in terms of things like, you know, I'd like to think that I had a huge influence on the development of Chester Zoo, and particularly the Islands project. And I played a part in that, but I played part of that as part of a big team. And so, you know, always it's with a whole lot of other people. And actually, you know, what's my greatest achievement? I always like to say, well, I'm not sure I've done it yet. You know, perhaps the best is still yet to come. And I'm now working with an incredible team of people who are incredibly skillful and supportive here at Zoos Victoria, which I just love so much. So yeah, so maybe my greatest achievement is yet to come.
Yeah, certainly can see why that would be something that gives you enjoyment or satisfaction. What else then would you like to achieve in your career?
Well, I'm currently working on a hugely exciting project here at Zoos Victoria of moving the fantastic multi-generational Asian elephant herd from Melbourne Zoo to here in Werribee, to a 21-hectare facility, which is going to be game-changing elephant welfare. It's just an incredible project. We're kind of right in the middle of the nitty-gritty of it right now, being built. So I guess right now I can't think past actually delivering that successfully, on time, on budget, and having a really successful transfer of the elephants here and the keeping staff. That's a big move for them too, and getting everything settled in. So the next 12 months, there's a lot to do in making all of that happen. And I'm hugely excited by all of that. And beyond that, I've always wanted just to make make more difference in terms of fighting extinction, the biodiversity loss. So again, one of the reasons I came to Zoos Victoria is because I'm just blown away by the incredible work they do with what we call our fighting extinction species, really saving species here in Victoria from the brink of extinction. So the more I can get involved and the more I can play a part in that, the better. But at the moment, the big focus is the elephant project right now.
So we've looked forward to what you might like to achieve in the future. Going right back then, what surprised you when you first started your career in zookeeping?
Yeah, I think when you start a career in zookeeping, I think you probably, I had perhaps a slightly romantic idea of what you did as a zookeeper, and actually you very quickly learn within the first few months that actually it's not all glamorous. Some of it's actually pretty grotty, and it's hard work, and it's cold and miserable, particularly doing it in the UK. And you know, but somehow it's hugely rewarding. So I think, you know, at the time, in the late 80s, early 90s, when I started my zookeeping career, a lot of people started and were gone within 6 months because it didn't suit them. And so you had to realize that actually there were huge rewards, but it came at a cost, and it wasn't, you know, it wasn't by far the best paid roles in the world. You know, kind of, I think things have moved on. In those days, you know, I remember being at a time when none of the zookeepers could afford to run a car, for example, or, you know, so but actually it was also hugely rewarding, and kind of we were working with people who were hugely passionate and shared the same passions that you did, and kind of, right, so that was always great. But the biggest surprise, I guess, was that I got through the first 3 years and survived it, and kind of and carried on, I guess, because yeah, although it was great fun, it wasn't always easy.
And thinking about paying it forward, what advice would you give for someone who's looking to start a career in this industry?
Do it would be the biggest advice. Hey, and it's tough, and I get asked this question quite a lot, because it's so many people want to get into, I guess people just want to make a difference, and we're seeing more and more people who just want to do something that they feel is really valuable, not just to them, but valuable on a bigger scale. And so having appointed and kind of been part of recruiting of a lot of young conservationists, I guess the best advice I can give is to do things that make you stand out from the rest. So, and that may be just putting yourself out there, volunteering, doing stuff, getting yourself known. And for me, who's somebody who was as a youngster particularly shy and very introverted, I really had to make an effort to put myself out there and do presentations, which I absolutely dreaded and I hated doing. But you sometimes have to put yourself out of your comfort zone and put yourself out there. And yeah, so I think it's about making yourself stand out from the crowd, because a lot of people want to do it, and that doesn't mean by just being. I think it just means by just working hard and communicating well, and being prepared to make sacrifices. If you want to go and volunteer somewhere, you might have to go and volunteer somewhere, and you may have to sort of like sleep in your car, or all those sorts of things that kind of people have to do to get themselves started. It's not always easy, but yeah, just make yourself stand out in some way, in the way that you work, and make lots of connections. Keep talking to people.
As an industry, as a whole, what do you think's commonly misunderstood about zoos and ex situ conservation?
Yeah, I think it's really important to understand that actually there are good zoos and bad zoos. So, I'm a big supporter. I've spent my whole career working in progressive, forward-thinking, conservation-focused, education-focused zoos, and I'm hugely proud of that. And I think that the work they do is generally very underrated, and the work they do is unseen by so many people because they're kind of discoloured by the poor zoos and the zoos that aren't conservation focused, and particularly if we look globally, then there's a lot of roadside zoos that really shouldn't exist, and they don't care for animal welfare. So you've got this kind of this balancing act. So I think that anybody who says I don't like zoos doesn't make sense to me, because there's such a spectrum. It's a bit like saying I don't like restaurants, right? There's like there's some fantastic restaurants out there. There's some dreadful ones. So you can't just lump everything together as one. So I think what's misunderstood is that whole kind of understanding of what the top progressive zoos in the world are achieving in terms of biodiversity, and it's incredible. I mean, I've been in this industry for a long time, and I'm still just blown away by achievements of what's going on in modern progressive zoos. It's incredible. So yeah, I still think that we have a fantastic media team here who pushes out all of our stories, but actually I still think generally in the population zoos are slightly misunderstood and are not, and the great work that's going on is still underestimated.
And what's the biggest challenge you think that ex situ conservation is facing or has to face?
The biggest challenge facing conservation is I think getting enough people to care. And that might sound strange. There's lots of pressures obviously on species. We know all of the issues of habitat loss and poaching, or whatever it may be, human encroachment. But actually all of that comes down to having enough people who care to make a difference. And so actually that's one of the reasons that education, and I don't mean formal education, but just having people come to a zoo and just be inspired by the things that they see and just gain a liking for animals. Actually, it's really not so deep and meaningful. It's just a case of coming in and saying, wow, there's some amazing things that we share our planet with, and just getting that love of animals. Because once you've got that, then you're going to want to protect that, because that's how it works. And so I think that the biggest challenge actually is there's not enough people in the world who really care about biodiversity and wildlife. And so if everybody cared, then it would make a difference. There'd be more funding, there'd be more political power, all of that stuff. So I think it's really about us being ambassadors for wildlife and for the importance of the environment. And it's starting to come through, but it's happening too slowly. And yeah, so for me, the biggest issue is that there's still not enough people who care, or at least not enough people who care enough to do something.
What do you consider to be an important trait for someone who's looking to work in conservation?
Resilience, I think, is probably the most important trait, because it's tough, because it is, it is a difficult task. It sometimes feels like you're constantly swimming against the tide. And yeah, so I think actually you have to be tough, and you have to be resilient, and you have to be absolutely single-minded on what you're trying to achieve, and just keep pursuing that goal. So you just have to keep there's always going to be setbacks in every conservation program, in every project. We get completely absorbed by all of the challenges and issues, politics, and the issues that come up with. But actually, you just need to cut through all of that. Remember why you're doing it, and just be, as I say, just absolutely single-minded on the purpose of what you're doing.
What gives you motivation?
Lots of things give me motivation, actually. I'm motivated by the purpose. I'm motivated by the greater purpose of the organisation that I work for. So for Zoos Victoria, that is fighting extinction. That motivates me hugely. But I'm also motivated on a smaller level by the people that I work with. I enjoy being around the team that I work with and the people that I work with. And I love being in the zoo, and I love being surrounded by the people who are here. I mean, I took a year out and did consultancy for a while, which in many ways was great. I had the freedom to come and go as I pleased, and all of those things. But I was kind of pretty much working on my own, and I just realised it didn't suit me. I love although I'm quite introverted, I just love being around people, and I get sort of fired up by other people's enthusiasm. And so, yeah. So what motivates me is, of course, the greater cause, but also just being around people who inspire you.
And yeah, we've talked about people that have been involved in your career, people whose career that you've been involved in. What kind of networking methods work, or have you found work well for you?
Yeah, so I guess kind of like, I'm somebody who really believes in face-to-face communication. So a bit of a dinosaur perhaps, and kind of right in the age of social media. But I can't help but feel that we are ultimately social primates, and so for me it was always about having face-to-face communication and putting myself out of the comfort zone. Every conference I went to, I would give a presentation, partly because I was hugely proud of the work that the organisation did. It wasn't always about promoting myself, but it was also about actually getting myself known to people, and sharing the work that I and the team were doing. And there's nothing quite like face-to-face conversations and actually giving presentations. And I still do that now, whether it's the local groups here or on a bigger global audience. But I just think you've got to take every opportunity actually to share the work that you're doing and you believe in. So kind of like social media, while I may not be the most modern social media user, but actually I can see the huge benefits of the reach that it gives you and the platform that it gives you to actually share those important thoughts and ideas that you have. So yeah, I mean, I think you just have to use every opportunity to get the message out.
So Mark, thank you for detailing your origin story there. To close the episode out, we're just going to finish on some fun, light-hearted questions. So Mark, are there any dream species that you'd love to see in the wild?
Yeah, so some of the species there's a number of things I'd like to see. I've been so fortunate in my career. I've been to some wonderful places and I've seen lots of wonderful species. But some of the things I haven't seen, and some of it's about actually the places they're from. So I've always loved Africa, and I love African forests. So I would love to see, for example, a carpy in the wild, and pygmy hippo. Both difficult species to see in the wild, and some part of that is seeing that species, but it's also part about being in that environment, which is tremendous. Just as species, then, and it's something that I'm planning to do actually within the next 12 months, hopefully. I'd like to see great white shark in the wild and kind of do a cage dive at some stage in South Australia. So kind of like that feels like great white sharks these days kind of feels like a movie star that you want to sort of bump into at some point, right? Something that's incredibly famous and just something that's just really awe-inspiring. And then perhaps species that I've worked with but never seen in the wild. And again, it's something like a Komodo dragon. Seeing a lizard of that size in the wild would be awe-inspiring. And yeah, that's another one that I'd like to see. And the other species I really like to see right now, because I haven't seen them in the wild yet, is a species that the Zoos Victoria is working with when they're fighting extinction species and is breeding and releasing, which is the orange-bellied parrot, which is a really important species here in Victoria that migrates across to Tasmania to breed and comes back. And we have them here. We keep them fit before their release program here, but I still haven't seen a wild one, and they're not that far away. And I've been looking lots, so hopefully not in the not too distant future, I will finally get to see a wild flying orange-bellied parrot.
Yeah, all of them fantastic species. Could get on board with that, and yeah, certainly hope for you that you do get to see the orange-bellied parrot. How about places to visit then? Is there anywhere that you'd love to see?
Yeah, again, I've been really fortunate in being able to travel a lot. There's lots of countries I'd like to visit, but actually there's only one continent that I've not visited, and that's Antarctica. So I would actually like to go to Antarctica and do an Antarctic expedition. Having said that, there's a bit of me that feels like, oh, actually, I really don't like being cold, but kind of like, yeah, but I've never been to Antarctica. I know a few people who have done Antarctic visits and just say it's awesome. So yeah, I have to say Antarctica. Not that I'm planning to do it right now, but sometime.
Yeah, fair. Yeah, wanting to complete the set. I get that. If you could be an animal, Mark, what would it be, and why?
Yeah, I would definitely be an eagle. Just because whenever I see eagles, and here I'm very fortunate, we have white-bellied sea eagles flying across the zoo occasionally, and also wedge-tailed eagles. I just think it just looks incredible. That effortless flying and soaring high above the countryside. Yeah, it just looks amazing. I mean, kind of like, yeah. So I just that freedom and that sort of yeah, it just looks so much fun just to be an eagle. So yeah, definitely be an eagle.
So yeah, heavy talk aside and career talk aside, how do you relax? How do you unwind when you're not working?
I feel like I'm lots of things. I've got lots of interests. So I'm a really big bird watcher, a bit obsessive bird watcher. I spend a lot of time bird watching, but it's not just about seeing the birds. It's actually about visiting new places, hiking, getting out to places where I'm likely to find new birds. So I just love getting out, camping, and visiting new areas here in Australia, and bird watching. But also I'm very fortunate where I live now. Here I have a house that has a large garden, which I'm gardening for wildlife. So I spend quite a lot of time actually sort of using a wildlife garden. I've just put in a wildlife pond, and just seeing how that develops and what comes in is here in Australia. It's just amazing. So lots of things, but I like being outdoors. I run most days in the morning, so I enjoy. Do I enjoy running? I think I enjoy running. I do it most days, and love being outdoors, which is why it's just so fantastic to be living here in Victoria, where kind of like even in the winter when it's cold, it's usually dry, and it's such an outdoor life. So I just love it. I love being outdoors. So yeah, loads keep me busy. I also got family. I've got grown-up kids who keep me busy, and yeah, lots to do.
Last question then, Mark. What, if there is just one thing, do you think our listeners should take away from this episode?
Yeah, perhaps the one thing is that the world is a much better place with wildlife in it, and that includes the rhinos, of course. And just to remember that actually biodiversity loss is the biggest issue that faces the world right now. It's not all of those other political issues that are going on, but actually in the longer term, when we really zoom out, I always think that life is so precious. As far as we're aware, that life on any planet is an incredibly rare thing, and if it exists anywhere else at all, it's an extremely rare thing. So we just really need to look after what's on the planet, and there's so much more we could do just to make sure that actually biodiversity remains at the levels that it is now. And again, it's back to people caring. So yeah, I think it's doing whatever it takes to protect the environment, to protect species and teach people that actually there's an enormous amount of joy and pleasure in life that comes out of sharing our planet with wildlife.
With that last question, you have completed the interview. So Mark, thank you so much for teaming up with me on the Conservationists Assemble. It's been an absolute pleasure to listen to your incredible knowledge on eastern black rhino and your unwavering dedication to ensuring a future for them. You're a valuable ally in the fight against extinction. And a huge thank you to you, the Conservationists Assemble cadets, for joining the mission briefing on eastern black rhinos. If you've enjoyed this volume of the podcast and wish to join the fight, please follow the podcast and share with your family and friends to help stack the odds in conservation's favour. If you'd also rate the podcast or wanted to provide suggestions for future topics, then DM me on Instagram or email podcasthq on conservationists.assemble@outlook.com. Until next time, recruits, Captain Conservation, over and out.